Exciting discussions. We've all learnt a lot. And in this last session, we wanted to pull everything together and talk about, well, what do we do next? You know, what can we do from all the material and information that we've learnt over the last couple of days? How can we pull it together, and what should we do next with it? So what we've done here, I'm going to go through just a few themes that we've identified during the meeting. And then we've got a set of questions, and we're going to sort of just throw it open to you for about 30 minutes or so and see what your suggestions are, your recommendations are with respect to where we go next. So with the themes, some of the themes that we've heard during the last couple of days. When we heard the presentation from Dr. Michelkar, it was really a lot about inclusive innovation. And by inclusive, it means inclusive of all the stakeholders, not just the technology developers, not just those that come up with the ideas, but the users, and all the other people who are involved, all the other stakeholders that are involved in the innovation process, all the way through to the end use. What are the sort of criteria that we're looking for as we look for solutions, technical solutions for the developing world? Affordability, but with excellence. It's still got to have a good functionality. But affordability was something that I kept hearing all the time. It's got to be affordable in the developing world. And it's also got to be accessible. It's got to be equally accessible to everyone. And so access equality was another criteria that we should plan against as we develop technologies. Another theme that came through for us was that we heard lots of technology solutions, lots of suggestions, but you can't just develop a technology solution in isolation. It's going to be part of an integrated energy system. And so you've got to think of how it fits into an integrated energy system. Distributed versus centralized systems. We know that sometimes the infrastructure just isn't there. So sometimes centralized systems won't work. So as we think of solutions, we've got to think, well, does it make more sense to just look at things as distributed? Biomass production, for example, for transportation. We talked at our session on biofuels. You know, the transportation costs, if you have to move them too far, means that a centralized system wouldn't make any sense. So there were lots of cases where distributed makes sense much more than centralized systems, and sometimes vice versa. Another theme is it's not just energy, but it's what it enables. Okay, so energy is a means to improving the quality of life, enabling certain things in the lives of the users. And there needs to be education for the users of those energy systems. And it's education in terms of technology, planning, organization. You can't just give them an energy system and expect them to use it. They need to be educated about it. Innovation, we talked a lot about innovation, but it's not just the technology. It's in all the aspects. Again, in the planning, the organization, in the policy development, and so on. We need innovation across many aspects of it. Okay. And another one is that we need to consider both rural and urban needs. I think we had a lot of discussion about rural applications, but there's also the urban needs and the need to sort of come up with solutions for people who live in urban areas. So there are probably lots of others as well. These are just a few. And so we just wanted to sort of outline those as a way to sort of initiate the discussion. And so we've got a set of questions, and I'm going to go through all the questions, then maybe we'll sort of try and address them one by one. I've really got 3 sets of questions. And the first question is, can developing countries leapfrog to more environmentally sound, lower-cost energy technologies that improve public health and well-being, as well as the overall quality of life? Can we leapfrog? I think the key word there is leapfrog. How can we manage to take what we know from the developed world, take what we can develop with new technologies, and leapfrog to a better quality of life? Number 2, what would it take to achieve this? And there are lots of sub-questions here. How can we most effectively have impact? In what areas should we be seeking these new technology solutions? What criteria should we set? What kind of partnerships are the most effective? What are the next steps that we should take? And I would look forward to a good discussion on some of those questions. And then finally, we ask a question, more general sort of question, what overall advice would you give to GCEP as we look for, as we're looking to find technology solutions? What sort of advice would you give us at an overall general level? So with that set of questions, I'm going to turn it over to Pete, who's going to moderate this discussion for the next 25 minutes or so.
Okay, just a couple of personal comments. We had an opportunity to visit several villages on Monday and Tuesday, which for me was a first visit outside of metropolitan areas in India. I've been here a little over a year, and my family asks what sites I've seen in India, and I tell them, well, I've seen the Jamnagar refinery and the Hazira plant and the Baroda plant, but this was one of my first ventures outside of business travel. And a couple of things that struck me that I'll definitely keep in mind as I go forward. When we ask people, what's your number one need? If you could change something, what would it be? And the number one answer was always water. Okay? And now that may be different than somebody living in the rainforest in Brazil who may not need water as badly. But I think in every region there's going to be something like that. None of them said they needed cheaper energy or sustainable energy. So what was clear is that it isn't energy, but it's what the energy can do, and what can it do in that environment. So I've been going along thinking about energy, which is important, but I really need to think beyond that. What am I going to do with the energy? The other thing I learned is I have two strikes against me. Okay, strike number one, I'm an engineer. So as an engineer, I see everything in the world as a problem that I need to solve, right? And I should have learned this lesson from my wife. She'll tell me some problem, and then I'll go on to tell her how to solve the problem, and she says, I just want somebody to listen to me. I don't need you to solve every problem I've got, right? So I still haven't learned that lesson. So we come in and think, as scientists and engineers, we're going to bring some wizardly technology in, and that's going to solve all the problems, and that's not the case. The second strike I have against me is I'm an American. And what I mean by that is, in America, there are some things we know. We're the greatest country in the world. Our system is the best. We know how to do everything the best way, right? Or at least that's what we think. So, we kind of come in with a preconceived notion of, well, how would this technology work in this village environment? But it became very clear to me that the way that technology will actually be brought to bear and have value is going to be unique to every country, to every village. And so I think that problem, I think, is at least as big as the technical one. So we need to understand that. I think education is a big part of what we need to do to get these technologies and to really help people. And the education is two-way. We need to teach them about the technology, how to manage it, how to use it. They need to teach us about the environment in which they're living and working so that we can adapt what we've developed for that. So those were a couple of the big takeaways that I had. So with that, we have some time for any general comments or observations. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you very much. It was an excellent format of seminar. The first day, first half, the NGOs came, and most of the NGOs as well as our scientific geniuses. And they gave us not only about their experience, they gave us some perspective about rural requirement and how they tried to solve it in the past. Second half, of course, was with Stanford, very reputed institution. And they did exactly what they were to do. They opened the frontier of knowledge. That is their basic fundamental job. And they very dispassionately told what they are doing. And that exactly feeds them. Today morning, it was the industry, and it showed that how, with right kind of investment, huge resource, and sense of purpose, companies like DuPont, Reliance, or GE can achieve breakthrough technology or solutions. And then afterwards, we tried to integrate these three streams of knowledge, or the three streams of idea, to find out some solutions. And I'm sure it was the right approach, first of all, the seminar format, seminar participants, and what we try to do. If not today, if this continues, definitely it is the right path, and we'll achieve something. Here, the question, the first one, you have written leapfrogging. And that is where exactly people like Stanford and Reliance or GE comes, supporting the NGO of the rural people. You see, yesterday mornings, most of the invention or innovation with catchy words, what was used, they were like developing implements or devices to solve real life problem or potential problem. But after all, it was just basic intuitive development which slightly improved efficiency or slightly tried to address a real life problem. In the evening, yesterday, it was frontiers of, as I said, knowledge. It is not solving any problem, but it is exploring the future, exploring various options that how, and as Sally said, that maybe 90% of what they are doing will not really yield any fruit. Maybe 10% will. But it is the high end of knowledge and exploration. And then comes GE, DuPont, and Reliance, huge resources, sense of purpose, project management, and management as such. And this, if leapfrogging is required, definitely, we know that with this effort of 20 years, we need Stanford, we need Reliance and DuPont and others. Because leapfrogging is not possible without them. Otherwise, the small development will go on, but leapfrogging will not happen. So the very idea that all these three constituents have joined hand, and Ajit has somehow made it happen, Sally has made it happen, it really to be applauded. And that is what I want to say. And future, if we are together, definitely something nice will come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's over here, and then over here.
Yeah, leapfrogging is a very noble goal, but I don't think it will happen very fast. And as an engineer and running an NGO, I will talk about what kind of partnership, and I'll immediately ask that I would like to have a couple of very bright students from Stanford coming to our NGO, because I think these bright kids, when they are sensitized to the problems of rural India, there will be wonderful solutions that will come. And this is a long process, but if it starts, it can happen, and a lot of things will come out.
Okay, thank you. And back here.
Let me take one by one the questions. I think let me start with what criteria should we selecting for research most promising. So what we saw most of the time were sort of localized problems. I mean, they were not really localized, but in a bigger concept, a water problem or energy problem or fuel problem and so on. And when I looked at all these systems, I see basically networks. I was having a talk with one of you guys, and there's an energy network. Practically everything is an energy network. You can call it electrical energy network. You can call it a fuel network. Transportation is also a sort of energy network. And we don't have tools, we don't have models, we don't have a proper understanding of all these networks interacting with each other. They do interact with each other. We don't have a way of visualization. So if a grand challenge had to be looked at, is trying to get a platform where experts from various streams come together and start working on developing these models where we start seeing the interaction of each of these things. So that's a platform which will allow us to measure the problem, quantify the problem in terms of different energy network, and also measure the performance. That will probably give us an indication of where are the critical points within these networks where they interact, which has a maximum impact. So that goes back to the first question, how do we identify the impact? Second part is that once we have this type of a system, it could be India, it could be any other country. So, and each place has its own unique features. So there has to be within the system, when you start simulating or optimizing, the social behavior or climatic conditions or whatever resources become the constraints for that system. And so that could be something which one can look at in a bigger group as a platform, as a grand challenge towards this.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then over here.
Yeah, this is PJ from Singapore again. So I just had a few comments. The first is that I think one key takeaway from this seminar so far is that in addition to the technology, I think also Dr. Homi also said that, business model also is quite important. And I think that we are making a distinction that might be a little bit too focused on semantics. Because if you think about it, technology is nothing more than sometimes a physical encapsulation of a good idea. And business models are very often the same thing. It's just the idea of how do you get other good ideas and packages out to clients and so forth. So I think that would be one thing that is important to look at if we are addressing some of the big problems here. The other one would be that I would say the second point would be that in addition to technologies and business models, the policy is also quite important, the policy environment. And I think that it's not just about government when we think about policy, but it's also about companies like Reliance, as a corporation, Reliance Foundation, like which corporate priorities. And when Mark was talking about the request for proposals, they could come from foundations like Reliance Foundation, for example, for water solutions that can be applicable for the rural countryside. As our GE counterparts have left, but Arjun was sharing that a lot of the solutions for water purification already are in the market. The challenge really isn't about that. The challenge is how do you get that technology down to a cost that you can get it out to the marketplace. So maybe that's a scope for a request for a proposal there by Reliance Foundation. The third one would be in terms of people are quite important as well. And by this, I mean, it's not just, when you talk about the importance of business models and all this, we need to have the exposure of people to different thinking. We need to I was talking to Benny about this, we need to break people out of their silos. Like when DP and Reliance Foundation brought the Stanford guys to see the countryside and the villages, that's the kind of exposure that you have to do and we have to do more of. To actually be able to develop more solutions to help the countryside. So organizations also like Engineers Without Borders, that could be something that GCEP could work with in Stanford as well. It's just a thought. A last additional point would be that we have been very much focused on technology, very much focused on helping the poor and so on and so forth. One thing to maybe think about would be if we were to also factor in possible economic unintended side effects. Like if we were to raise the income levels of all the people in the countryside, what about the inflationary impact of this on local contained economies? Would this price other people? Would this create further income inequalities? These are second order questions that are not trivial and potentially have large impacts that might also need to be considered. Just my few cents.
Okay, thank you. See, it's go in the back and then over here.
Hello. I would also, first of all, like to acknowledge the comments that were made by a lot of other people. They're similar to what I had wanted to talk about. But one of the things is, I also have an engineering background, but then went into management. One thing I realize is as engineers and scientists, we are always trying to optimize a solution. We are always trying to find the best solution. Sometimes it may not always be the best that is the one that's required. It may have to be the most economical, the most social, and so on and so forth. But very often as engineers or as scientists, we tend to always neglect the next best alternative. We always want the best. That's just a thought. The other thing is, Ashwin was talking about the interaction effects. What we need is research that's multidisciplinary, right? Most of the technology concepts that were talked about are still in silos. they're still specific in solar or specific in water and specific in coal. We may have to start talking about multiple systems, how they interact, the interaction effects. So multidisciplinary research is where we should head. And the other thing is the distribution, right? I mean, we are not from centralized, we are going back to the distributed systems, where systems should be small and manageable rather than, scaled out models. So probably we need to rethink our solutions in terms of, not in terms of scalable models, but in terms of small models that can be implemented across multiple scenarios. So maybe scenario generation, with customized solutions. The other thing is to try and involve the people who are going to be the users of such products and technologies. Very often we tend to neglect their requirements and their needs. It's always like science has created something and we are pushing this technology. So somewhere I think we need to try to make it more market focused and try to bring in their requirements. So that is probably something that we'll have to consider. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In the U.S. we have an expression which I've always kind of remembered. It may be known here, and that is that best is the enemy of better. So sometimes if we strive for the best, that's a noble goal, but it stops us from making something that's just simply better. So yes, over here. Oh, here. Sorry. And here.
My comments are mainly from a planning and execution perspective. See, first you identify a project that you want to do, right? After that, somebody mentioned that we were to put together some kind of a failure database which explains why similar projects have failed. That's very important that you identify why people have failed in a similar area. Once you select a project, a failure analysis of why something has been happened. The third thing is probably, understanding the market and the particular context, because as you people have gone around and seen, water has been a very major issue. So sometimes it is just the reduction of power requirement, for instance, in pumping, as I mentioned in villages, that 75 to 80% is in the pumping cost of water because of the reduced water table. And the fourth thing is testing that whatever solution you've developed locally before inside your ecosystem before you go out and try to execute, because you're not going to get a second chance in the villages. They start rejecting things pretty fast. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay, over here and then here.
I have a specific comment for the researchers. So I have a specific comment for the researchers from Stanford. So it's been pretty great interacting with them. But I think currently the way I just had an understanding of the way the research is being done is more top-down. So you start with an object of pushing the boundaries of research by thinking of publishing in a journal, and then you try to find out if there are some applications of that, and then just try to go and implement that in the field. So I think instead of following that kind of process, which in the end, I don't know how much of application will be coming out of it. I would just make a suggestion to them that probably try to start with the problem first, identify the problem first, because we are saying, issues of interdisciplinary research and all these things are coming up because we are starting from the fact that, it's physics, science, engineering, all that stuff. So the moment you start with the problem first, then automatically you will be looking more at solving the problem with its various dimensions. So, sensitization to the problem from its various dimensions is more important rather than trying to do some research which is more theoretical in nature and then trying to come down and implement that. So that's a specific comment for them.
Yeah. Problem definition is, of course, a big challenge in all forms of research. And getting the problem defined right. Obviously, if we have the wrong problem, we come up with the wrong solution or an extraneous solution. Sometimes the solution can actually be harmful. And, a man that has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So,
along with that, yes. Like in the case of a country like India, maybe you're an American, so you have a better sensitization to it right now. There are a lot of softer issues which are involved, as Emily was there in one of the groups. So I think Charles asked, how do they do the tapping or hooking from the power things? It's really simple, but for a lot of people there, it's not that simple. So you start from that point, then you will be able to understand, if you put yourself in the shoes of the end consumer, you will get a sensitization of that. Mm-hmm. But if you start from the fact that, okay, you want to write an equation which is going to get published in the Nature, then getting down to that level is,
Yeah.
good luck with that. Thanks a lot.
I actually deliver a whole one-day lecture on this topic of understanding what customers want. And basically, what I've concluded is they don't care about the thing, but they care about the functionality the thing delivers. So if I have a phonograph, a tape player, a CD player, and an iPod, the primary function of all of those devices is to play music. But as that evolved, each generation delivered the functionality to harmful effects and limiting contradictions. So understanding, what is the functionality that people want and need, how is it being delivered today, that provides us the insight to define the problem properly and make the right changes. Okay, over here and then here.
I would only comment on point 3. What criteria should we set for selecting the research with the most promising potential? This is also based on what Mr. Rajvanshi said yesterday. The time is fast running out for, of course, some breakthrough research is welcome, but time is fast running out. India in the next 5 years primarily faces 3 problems. One is we have 100 to 150 million people entering the workforce. All our export markets are slowing down. With the current government, with the license Raj and all that, I doubt much investment will flow into India to raise employment. So whatever research you select should at least have the potential to generate employment for various people in rural India. That is point number 1. Point number 2, we also face a water crisis. Barring the west coast of India, as per the World Bank, almost all the regions of the country are water deficient. So we need to, and most of the problems identified with the World Bank related to water mismanagement is largely water wastage. So the second research criterion could be whether it reduces water wastage. And third is, based on the King's College seminar which was held in London a couple of weeks back, where again some similar think tank some kind of a group was organized. The next ruler of India will not determine energy sector, but whoever controls energy for India will determine who will sit in Delhi. So the third item should be how will this group or Stanford or whatever will deliver some kind of energy which will be next 5 years, either it is efficiency or reducing wastage, or perhaps it's some new source to also actually satisfy these needs. These are the 3 most, in my opinion, whatever few seminars I've attended, read, I feel are the 3 burning issues which could be used as criteria for selecting the research with the most potential employment and reducing water wastage and finding the next energy wastage or reducing energy wastage or energy source. Thank you.
Okay, over here and then over here.
Hello. Can developing countries leapfrog? I have just one thing to share. Going by the experience of leapfrogging in fuel specifications, we have invested in excess of about $12 billion in last 10 years in India for going to Euro 3, Euro 4 specs. As I mentioned earlier, because we had that as a reference point to leapfrog. But if you see the species analysis and source apportionment study for Mumbai, the particulates are actually coming not from vehicular exhaust at all. The major share is coming from construction and industrial sector. Now, if we follow the same analogy of leapfrogging further to going to Euro 5, 10 ppm and others, the risk we run is, as a poor country, we have limited resources and we are not doing cost-benefit analysis and seeing how does our ambient air quality improve with the best investment in the appropriate silos that actually demand that investment. One area, in my view, where Stanford can actually help a country like India is in rank ordering and modeling with all the options that we have in terms of what would be the overall impact on public health, well-being, and whatever you have written there. And then tell the country as a whole as to this is the next 20, 30 years scenario. Coming from that, the area then I would think, I'm just focusing on the fuel side. What would be the research area where I see most promising potential is it was emphasized earlier in the breakout session. You have 90% of vehicles will never retire in India. We don't throw old vehicles. By compulsion also, you will find a way to get it registered out of Bombay. You will go outside the Bombay and then fly in Bombay. So there are innovative, creative ways of doing that. Is to actually focus research on, I like that sootless combustion. Well, that's on the combustion side. Do that. But that's futuristic. What we need to do is after treatment devices, diesel particulate filters. Can we develop after treatment device which works on, say, a higher level of sulfur, maybe 50 ppm. We have enough hydro treating capacity in the country to actually lower sulfur, but tinker with other specifications, as Ajit was also referring. And then that's the way you will see what you said, big impact. And as was that Dr. Ramanathan yesterday, he said the impact of black soot and others, which is very, very 10 years, rather than having greenhouse gases which have 100 years. We have still time on CCS. We have still time on CO2. But we can actually show visible, and that's where people will see visible progress. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry, just one last point. Okay. Having said all this, the centrality of the issue of pricing cannot be underestimated. Many speakers yesterday talked about kerosene chula and designs and all that. I must share, actually, why kerosene? You can actually give everybody LPG. What's the problem? Problem is, when you make LPG in a refinery in India today, you can't even recover cost of crude oil, because landed cost of LPG that you can recover is 80%, 70% of Saudi CP price. So if governments were to actually allow you at least to take crude oil price as realization for LPG, you would make more LPG. So why talk about giving a higher calorific value? So centrality of the issue of pricing, you talk about low carbon should have higher premium. Hydrocarbon ratio you're saying, and high carbon should have discount, So you should work. So essentially the whole structure of pricing of hydrocarbons also needs to be kept in mind.
Okay, thank you. And over here, and then one more comment. And
yeah, quite the contrary context to yours. You mentioned about engineers tending to find solutions for problems. I am a development worker who tends to find problems for every solution.
We should get together.
Yeah, so I think we'll get. My points are limited to rural renewable context, and more in terms of trying to highlight opportunities for GCEP. First and the foremost, I would say, if we are looking at rural renewable in the context of sustainable and self-reliant, then we need to look at energy not as a standalone, but energy as a subset of local ecosystem. And energy needs to blend itself and find its level within the homogeneity of that ecosystem. And I think a lot of work can be done on generating those alternatives or opportunities. Secondly, I've been here only from today morning. I've been hearing this thing about low cost, affordable, least cost, and as a business proposition. I think if we look at any business, any greenfield area, there is a development investment which never gets factored into the viability of the business. And if we are looking at renewable energy in the rural context, we need to find where does that development investment come from. It doesn't need to be looked at as a cost or affordable. It's an investment to shift a certain paradigm and to move to a different one. The third part is about what kind of partnerships are most effective. I think if we are looking at partnership in the same rural renewable context, we need to look at the user community and look for partnerships where they have an equity as a stakeholder. And it's that equity which will leverage or drive the ownership and the alternatives further. It will strengthen it. If we are looking at it purely mercenarily from a market perspective, then that particular very big segment is not going to be there for a long, long time to come. Lastly, I've also been hearing about, in today's context, that we're looking at this from a market point of view. Where does it exist? Where does the opportunity exist? I think we should be looking at energy technologies as creating new avenues and new markets. And that is where the opportunity lies, because there is a lot that's going to be possible in terms of an earning or something coming on board for the community or the household there, which when spent becomes part of the market. But initially, it's not a rupee which exists there. So if we are looking at tapping that rupee which doesn't exist and make it fly outside, I think, again, we've retarded ourselves even before we start. Thank you, and that was the
Okay, time for two more questions. We'll do Bani and Homi.
I just wanted to reflect on how special these few days have been. I think it's remarkable to have the diversity of people that have collected in this room. I can't remember when I've been in the room with this density of insight, intellect, and purpose. And for me, it has struck a chord on several levels. I think I leave edified and sensitized to many issues. I think we've identified some really exciting directions and principles. And I think the fact that the last slide is questions rather than answers is terrific. But such a collection of people makes me wonder about why we are not leaving with the conviction that we just can change the future of the country. Because a fraction of this intellectual horsepower have changed countries in the past. So it would be great to somehow, at least as a follow-up, not just leave with the principles and embed them in our own universes, but also leave with the unique collective power that now resides in this room.
Okay, thank you.
So I've been kind of reflecting on what I have seen over the past 2 days. The Stanford team, GCEP team now has been in India for a week-ish. You've had a chance to go around. You've had a chance to visit various places, the rural areas. You've had a chance to talk to this kind of audience. And I am sure in that process, as Bani said, there are a lot of revelations that you've had. In my mind, it depends what GCEP wants to do in an emerging market. If you are interested in solving the needs of the emerging market, there are a whole bunch of needs that can be solved or can be addressed, I should say. If, on the other hand, your interest and your objectives are to do breakthrough kind of research, which is extraordinarily important, by the way, then it's a different question. And you have to think about what you want to do. And there is no question in my mind that there are enormous amount of problems we can solve. No question in my mind, GCEP's talent and capabilities can help us solve these problems. It's a matter of what you wish to do and where you wish to apply your focus and thrust. You've had a history of approaching fundamental problems and doing extraordinary work there. And you can continue doing that. If you want to resolve and help solve emerging market problems, that's going to be a different approach. And so I kind of leave that back to you and ask you to introspect and find, and try to come to that answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you?
Thank you.
Can you just here, Prashant? This is Prashant here from G. To say that still G is here. Yeah. I just want to quote an example to you how G works, and maybe it will be useful information for the GCEP. we looked at the problems in two types. One is a pure research, which is going to come 15 years from now, 20 years from now. We do same way what you described, science, physics, and then develop an application and so on, and then look at where can I deploy? Can it go in healthcare? Can it go in energy? Can it go in aviation? So that's the way we do development for the 15, 20 years ahead. The other sector of what we look is what needs to be done in the next 10 years, next 5 years. That is more of an industrial research which happens. So my suggestion to you is maybe all the research work, what we talked yesterday from Stanford, is probably towards the larger goal of long-term research. But it would be important if you can also focus on to say next 5 years, what are the immediate industrial research related activity that needs to be lined up, connected to the more of an industry. And that can be done more you being in the field and talking to the industry, talking to the, as you did yesterday, and visiting to some of the villages and so on, collecting those input. That would give you what needs to be done in the next 5 to 6, 7 years. They may not be pure research of a long term, but they are immediate problem solving issues where industry needs help. As a GE, we do have, intellectual people who have worked on it, but if Stanford kind of an institute can come and support us on some of these problems, which can be solved for the next 5 years, that's great. So we can give you a list of issues which we think are the, immediate solution that can be done. And my view, if you ask me, there are enough technologies today which are already there. It's a question of resolving in A, B, C, D, I have to resolve the C and D for technology A. In a technology B, maybe there are some other problems. So those identification of those minute granular problems in each of the technologies and resolving them in the next 5, 6 years, you can make the developing countries to make a leapfrog. That's what I'm thinking so.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that we've run out of time. I would like to continue this discussion for quite a while. I think we would benefit greatly from it. But we do need to get to the concluding remarks. So my personal thanks, and I'll turn this over to Sally.